Hello and welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Katie Delmay, and I am a senior curator here at the Frist Art Museum. And I'm delighted that you all are joining us for today's conversation with LaToya M. Hobbs and Dr. Rebecca VanDiver. As is our custom at the Frist, first I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement. The Frist Art Museum sits on land the Cherokee and Shawnee Native peoples, elders, and ancestors call their homeland. We acknowledge and pay respect to them, and we offer deep gratitude and respect to the land and water that supports us. The Frist Art Museum is thrilled to open Carving a New Tradition, the Art of LaToya M. Hobbs, here in the Gordon Contemporary Artist Project Gallery today, the very first day. We are so delighted to have LaToya Hobbs with us. Thank you, LaToya, and to your wonderful family. We have both her children, her husband, and her mother, and some extended family here today, too, to help celebrate. Born in Arkansas and now based in Baltimore, Hobbs explores Black womanhood, family, labor, self-care, and the rich traditions of printmaking while pushing the medium's boundaries. Today, LaToya is joined in conversation with guest curator Dr. Rebecca VanDiver, Associate Professor of African American Art at Vanderbilt University, and the 2023-2025 Chancellor's Faculty Fellow. Dr. VanDiver received her bachelor's degree from Harvard University and her master's and PhD from Duke University. She is a noted art historian who specializes in 20th century Black women artists. She literally wrote the book on Lois Mailou Jones, an artist featured in Southern Modern, and has contributed articles to many scholarly journals. And I just want to add a personal note of what a pleasure it has been to work with Rebecca. I've had the good fortune of working with her and collaborating with her on many projects from 2013, when she just arrived in Nashville, when we were co-presenters on a panel on the now legendary exhibition 30 Americans, to recently she wrote an essay for my exhibition Multiplicity, Blackness in Contemporary American Collage. She also wrote for our recent Alma Thomas exhibition and Southern Modern, so she is quite busy and very prolific. So we were very excited, given our relationship with Dr. VanDiver, when she proposed curating this exhibition on an artist that we weren't familiar yet, and one that really connected with her own scholarship. So it has been such a privilege working with you, Rebecca, and watching this project develop. Please do take a moment to silence your phones and to identify your nearest emergency exit while I thank our lenders and supporters. We are grateful to the Baltimore Museum of Art for lending the amazing piece that most of you probably have already seen, Carving Out Time, and also to the Amistad Research Center at Tulane University for their loans. We also gratefully acknowledge our supporters, lead sponsor Blevins Inc., and also the Gordon Contemporary Artist Project Gallery Fund, and additional support from the Friends of Contemporary Art. As ever, we are grateful for the continued operating support from the Frist Foundation, Metro Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the National Endowment for the Arts. So now, please join me in welcoming Rebecca and LaToya to the stage.
Can everyone hear us? Great.
Hello.
First, I want to extend thanks to all of you for coming out on a Friday midday to join us in conversation. And I would love to thank LaToya Hobbs for sharing her wonderful body of work with us here in Nashville, and to the curatorial and administrative and executive staff here at the Frist Art Museum for so generously allowing me to curate this exhibition. As we'll discuss today, when I saw LaToya's work, in particular a piece called Carving Out Time, I knew immediately that I wanted to bring it to Nashville, and I'm just so thankful that the Frist believed in that vision, and I can't wait to hear what all of you think about the work once you get to experience it in person. Katie did such a lovely introduction of me, and I would like to introduce all of you to the artist known as LaToya M. Hobbs, a name that you now know but should continue to keep an eye out for. As I said in another email that some of you may have received, LaToya is an art star that is on the rise, and we are just pleased to be in your orbit at this particular moment. So LaToya was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. She received her BA in painting from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and an MFA in printmaking from Purdue University. Since 2013, she has been on faculty at the Maryland Institute College of Art, where she is active in the first-year experience program. In addition to maintaining her studio practice, she is also a founding member of the Black Women of Print, an important organization committed to drawing needed attention to Black women artists working on paper. In addition to her solo exhibition that we have here at the Frist, she has had solo presentations at the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art, California State University, and Goucher College. She has an upcoming show at Harvard Art Museum that opens in March. In addition to her solo shows, she has participated in numerous group exhibitions at the Arkansas Museum of Fine Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and more. She has also received recognition in the form of awards and fellowships, among them being named a finalist for the Queen Sonia Print Award, winning the 2020 Janet and Walter Sondheim Artscape Prize, and a 2019 Joan Mitchell Foundation Emergency Grant. You can find her artwork in a number of important collections, including the Harvard Art Museum, the Jordan Snitzer Family Foundation, the David C. Driscoll Center, the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and more to come in the future. So welcome, please join me in welcoming LaToya to the Frist.
Well, I'll just take a moment to say hello. So in my presentations, this is normally my introduction slide when I introduce myself. First, I want to thank each of you for taking the time to listen to me talk about my work. It's a privilege, and it's something that I definitely don't take for granted. There's so many other things that you can be doing on a Friday afternoon, so thank you for spending this time with me. I'd like to acknowledge my family that came to be here with me today. Thank you so much. Rebecca, I appreciate you for seeing me, seeing my work, and being responsible for bringing it here. As I mentioned, I'm LaToya Hobbs. I describe myself as a painter and printmaker. In addition to my work as an artist, I'm a mother. You can see it's a picture here of me and my family. My two sons, Ade and Theo, are here. My husband, Harrison Jackson. So they are the motivation behind a lot of the work that I do. So whenever I introduce myself, I make sure to include them as well.
I think we have. So speaking of family, I wanted to start this conversation with asking you about the significance of legacy and lineage in your work, both in terms of familial lineage, if I can speak today on a Friday, of familial lineage, but also artistic lineage, and how you see yourself as a 21st contemporary artist fitting into a larger history of Black women artistry.
Yeah, so a lot of my work right now in particular deals with I call it my ascent into motherhood, which is, again, such a big part of my life right now. And so in thinking about that, I've been doing a lot of contemplation about what it means to be a matriarch, how that term has like changed over time, and how like the face of motherhood has changed over time. And so in a lot of my works, I'm paying homage to that idea or that thought. And so the work that we have on the screen and right now is titled Queen Anne. It's a portrait of my mother. Her name is Angela, but most people call her Anne, so just titled it Queen Anne. But this work is significant in a few ways. I think it kind of introduces you to the multiplicity of my process. As I mentioned, I'm a painter and printmaker, so I like to cross the boundaries between both of those two worlds, and a lot of the mixed media works that I produce have elements of both of those practices, but this is a portrait of my mother, just again thinking about documentation of the matriarchs in my family, and so thinking about myself as a mother, what has been passed down from my grandmother to my mother, what she's passed down to me, and also in turn what I'm passing down to my children. So again, thinking about that cycle of lineage and how it continues from generation to generation. But in this work also, something that is significant, you'll notice that in the back of the space that I'm depicting, there are two artworks. One is by Elizabeth Catlett, who I affectionately call my art mother. She's pretty much one of the primary reasons why I'm a printmaker today. The other work that you'll see, the kind of lighter drawing, is a work by Samela Lewis, who is also a very notable artist and art scholar, or printmaker. So I'm kind of, not only am I paying homage to my birth mother, but also paying homage to my art mothers who have, influenced and shaped my practice.
What strikes me about this portrait of your mother is how it speaks to both that dual lineage, right? Your own family history and the art history with which you see yourself engaging. And as you see from the caption here, it's an oil acrylic collage and relief carving. So again, also the mixed media into the sort of complicated process by which you produce your artwork. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit also about the patterns that we see here, because that'll be a thread that weaves its way through a lot of your artwork as well.
Yeah, so a lot of the patterns are inspired by Adinkra symbols, which are most commonly associated with West African culture. So they kind of started to creep into my work, I would say, around 2010, 2011. It was during my first year of graduate school. And so you're just kind of challenging your own identity as an artist during that time. And so I was really looking for something else to kind of accompany my figurative work, because I think the figure is so important and something that I'm not willing to compromise on or get rid of in my work. But at the same time, you do want to, challenge yourself and see what other things or elements you can bring into that. And so for me, the Adinkra symbols, just learning about them from some of my friends, and also from my husband, a book he was reading at the time, he was gracious enough to let me borrow, and I was able to research them. And I just found that a lot of the themes kind of dealt with some of the ideas that I was thinking about in my work at the same time. So so the patterning kind of started to creep in and accompany the figure.
Great, I just wanted to make note of that, as we'll see a lot of that as we go through your practice. So you describe yourself as both a painter and a printmaker. Let's see if we can get this to advance. Could you advance it, Erin? Great. So this is a really recent woodblock print from 2023, but I'd love it if you could describe how you came to both painting and printmaking as your mediums of choice.
Yeah, so actually I started out as a biology major in undergrad, but I've always been interested in the arts side, not only like visual arts, but I love dance. Like if I could choose another career, I would love to be an Alvin Ailey dancer. Performance, all those things that I really enjoy, and I did those things all throughout junior high and high school, but when I got to college, it was like, I didn't have the context of what it meant to be a professional artist. That was not something that I thought was an actual thing, I just knew that those were things that I enjoyed, but I was like, okay, well, it's time for me to like prepare to get a real job now. And so I had an interest in the body, and so I was like, I'll just be a biology major and I'll go to med school. But I went through that, and I just was in all these labs, and I was like, I do not want to do this.
I felt the same way.
Yeah, so I was just like, learning about the fruit fly, and I was like, I am not interested in salt. And so I really could have just taken some anatomy classes and been fine. But I eventually just I went through this period where I was just really unhappy. And I just wanted to get back to the things that I enjoyed. And I remember I was in church one time, and the preacher was preaching a sermon about basically the things that we enjoy are a sign of what we should be doing. Like, what would you do even if you didn't get paid for it? Like, what brings you joy? And so that kind of put me on this quest to really get back to the things that I enjoyed. And so I just started taking dance classes again. I started taking art classes here and there. I eventually transferred back to Little Rock. I started out school at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, but I went back to UALR, and I tried the biology one more time, but I was like, yeah, this isn't it. And so one of my professors, he was just like, what are you trying to do with your life? with your life? And I was like, well, I want to be an artist. He said, well, you just need to commit to being an art major. And so I decided, well, what would I be? And I, just being young and not knowing a lot about the art world, I decided, well, I'll be a painter because I think painters get the most respect. And so in my coursework, I was required to take printmaking. At the time, I really wasn't familiar with the medium, and so I was just like, oh, I don't need this class. I'm a painter, But I eventually really fell in love with it, and based on the imagery that I was making, my professor at the time showed me Elizabeth Catlett's work. And I was like, oh, this is printmaking? This is what you can do? And so I was also really just blown away by her imagery. I had not been really exposed to a lot of artists, Black women artists in particular, who were making the type of imagery that she was, that really, I was able to see myself and see my mother, see the women in my family. And so that kind of sparked me to want to delve into printmaking more intensely. So I started taking additional independent studies in printmaking, and I decided when I was going to go to graduate school, I wanted to do my MFA in printmaking.
So on screen here, we're looking at LaToya's Arc of Safety from 2023, and then an Elizabeth Catlett print entitled Madonna from 1982. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Elizabeth Catlett, she was a very important 20th century African-American artist who trained at Howard University, and then, like LaToya, also worked between two mediums, was an active sculptor and a printmaker throughout the 20th century, known for her interest in representing Black and brown women's experiences in her art. So I think that your citing of her frequently in that portrait of your mother, and then the references that you make to her work in your extended body of prints and carved wood panels really invites us to remember her and to think about the way in which she was groundbreaking in her time, and how I see you in the 21st century really carving a new tradition and making way for visitors to sort of see themselves in that way and to sort of see the power in representation. So I want to talk a little bit about the significance of representation in your work and the power of the figure. And we can look a little bit at some of your earlier work that you've pulled for us as we think about the evolution of your content.
Yeah, and I think my experience as an undergraduate student is really exemplary of why representation is important, particularly in an academic setting, because I just really wasn't exposed to a lot of artists making images that I felt could resonate with me. In some of my earlier artist talks, I would make this joke that a lot of my art history experience was like white people with halos. And so for a moment, I had halos in my work. So I was like, I'm gonna put some halos on Black people to show our sense of righteousness. But it was really important for me to be exposed. And so I got some of that exposure, not necessarily through the art history classes where you would expect to get that. And I remember a couple instances distinctly. One of my professors who was teaching painting, he was like, what are some artists that you like? And I couldn't even really name any Black artists. I would say Michelangelo, because that was the only, context for a artist that I knew. And he was like, why are you studying all these dead white men? he started talking about Nkechi Mutu and Mickalene Thomas and all these other people that I had no idea who they were. And even my friend at the time, now husband, we met when he was in graduate school and I was in undergrad. And so, he is an art nerd, and he would just talk about all these artists and say all these names, and I was like, I have no idea who you're talking about. And he was like, how will you be an artist and you don't even know these people? So it just really challenged me to do like some research on my own. So I would just go to the library and check out books and try to get the art history foundation that I felt that I needed on a personal level. So I think as educators, and that's something that I try to do in the classroom, is to make sure that I'm showing all different types of artists, not just kind of the same old people that kind of get cycled, because we're inspiring the next generation of artists and art historians, and they're only going to go to what they're exposed to, and sometimes they don't know what to look for. So I think that's so important, and I feel like I'm filling the gap of that in my work. So a lot of the portraits that I didn't see, I'm producing those types of images with my work.
Yeah, so sort of recognizing the hole that needs to be filled and taking initiative to fill it with the work you're producing. So we're looking at on screen here at two early examples, 2012 and 2011, of your more traditional wood relief prints that are works on paper. We'll talk a little bit more about the process of pulling a print for those of you who are unfamiliar. But I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about who Crystal and Clarice are to you.
Yeah. So a lot of the people, I would say maybe 90% of the people in my work are people that I know personally, friends, family, people that I've met throughout various stages in my life. Clarice is actually somebody that I used to do liturgical dance with at church. So she was a really close friend, and she just kind of radiated this kind of, I don't know, like Mother Earth type of imagery, which I think that kind of reverberates with the color palette that you see. There's a lot of like earth tone colors in an earth tone palette. This is also kind of, again, some of the earlier instances where you can see the use of Adinkra symbols to create patterns to support the figure. And then Crystal is another amazing Little Rock native. She's a poet, she's an artist. And so I think I met her backstage at a fashion show, and I was just really amazed by her hair. I think at the time I was just kind of making my own transition to wearing my hair natural. I had like cut off all my straightened, relaxed hair, and I was rocking my little afro, and she just had this gorgeous hair, and I was like, I just really want to paint, I really want to make portraits of her, and so we connected in that way, and it kind of stayed connected over the years as well. And I think the next image is also of Crystal as well. And so this work is significant because it kind of marks like the first iteration of me bringing all the various processes that I work with together on the same surface. And so I was really interested in one, just challenging myself and thinking about what else can I bring to the conversation of portraiture within my work. So thinking about ways to set myself apart, also to make my work a little bit more contemporary. So for me, a natural progression was to try to bring everything together on the same surface. And so this is an example of a series of nude portraits that I did from my thesis work. It was titled Beautiful Uprising, and I was really exploring the intersection of race, beauty, and identity among Black women. It's just kind of questioning how we govern ourselves in those areas. And this work is also significant because I started the process of interviewing the models for the work. So they're not just represented like the physicality of them, but they're represented mind and spirit as well. So if you look closely in the image, you can see text in this work. And so that is from my interview or conversation with her. So literally putting their words as the foundation of the work and then building their form on top of that. And also I used excerpts of their writing to serve as titles for the pieces as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to sort of understand who the subjects are because they're personal to you, but in so many ways, and we'll talk more about this, your work is specific but also universal, and the sitters are significant to you, but also resonate with us not even knowing them. I love the way you just described how you used their own words and the words from the interview as a sort of foundation to the work, because I think that's a nice transition to think about the evolution of your practice and the ways in which you're really innovating in terms of transforming the support of the project or of the work itself. So on screen here is Aaron and Anaya, also from 2023. I should say from the outset that something that's really exciting about the installation that we have here at the Frist is that the quote-unquote oldest work by LaToya on view is from 2020, 2021, and then the rest of the work is all from 2023. So she's been hard at work, and we're getting to benefit from the fruits of your labor. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the innovations you've made in terms of transforming the woodblock.
Yeah, so I purposely put the previous image and this one together just to kind of show the evolution of my practice. The previous work was a lot more loose and a lot more experimental. Now you can see that the work has become a little bit more refined and a little bit more sophisticated in terms of the technical aspect of the work, which is something that I'm always trying to improve and to build upon and to continue to add to. This is actually, it's hard for me to describe, like to pick my favorite work, but this is like among like my top 2 favorite pieces right now. It's titled Aaron and Anaya with hydrangeas, and it just kind of shows you the evolution of how this idea of me combining both aspects of my identity as a painter and a printmaker. I'm really interested in this idea of the print matrix as the art object. And so if you're not familiar with printmaking, you have your matrix, which is what you use to produce a set of works on paper, or an edition set of works on paper. And normally, the matrix is something that you just kind of set aside, that you're not going to use anymore after the edition is done. But I just found that there is so much beauty in the image. And I also, for me, like I'm fine with making prints, but I really love the carving process. And a lot of times, sometimes I see the print and I'm like, oh, that's good. But then look at this block over here. I get really excited about that. So I started, questioning, well, why can't the block be the art object in and of itself? So a lot of my more recent work has been continuing to push that idea and, to constantly make these works that seamlessly marry all the techniques and the processes that I do.
That the decision to exhibit the matrix as a finished standalone object, I think also draws important attention to the act of carving and the labor that goes into making the print that sometimes we lose sight of when we're just looking at the paper, work on paper that's hung framed, right? You don't get a sense of that activation that happens when you're removing wood from the surface of the woodblock and then rolling the ink onto it, or in the case here, painting the surface. I really invite you to look closely at Aaron and Anaya in the CAP galleries because there's just some subtle nuances with their use of metallic and the color that really makes the piece come alive. We were delighted to secure the first debut loan of your monumental Carving Out Time, which is on view in one of the rooms in the CAP galleries. And I wanted to spend some time talking about Carving Out Time. It was a work that when I saw it, my jaw dropped. I knew immediately that I had to see it in person. I knew immediately that I wanted to bring it here to Nashville to have everyone get to experience it in person. And it had been acquired shortly after you completed it by the Baltimore Museum of Art. So we're incredibly thankful to that institution for loaning it to us so you can all experience it today. But I'd love for you to talk about Carving Out Time, which, as you may have seen already or you will see when you go into the galleries, is really a monumental 5-part series that walks you through a day in LaToya's life as a mother, as an artist, as a teacher, and speaks to all of the sort of daily negotiations that we make with ourselves to get everything done. Something that first struck me about Carving Out Time was its scale and its size. It's really wall size. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit about scale.
Yeah. As Rebecca mentioned, carving out time I describe it as a portrait of my day. And again, for me, a continuation of this idea to push my portraiture practice, and not only kind of showing like bust images of people, as you saw with some of my earlier works, but really thinking about this idea of narrative portraiture and what it means to really get a sense of the person, not only through like their physicality, but also through the spaces that they occupy. And so carving out time, the scale in particular was inspired by this amazing print by Carrie James Marshall, who is another influence of mine. You can see an image of that on the screen. In the image right now, you can see a young LaToya from 2014, seeing this work for the first time in the 30 Americans exhibition in New Orleans. Is a mind-blowing experience. So for me, this was shortly after I finished graduate school. And I think at the time, like the largest print that I had done was an 8x4 foot block. And so, I was like, proud of myself. I'm doing this large work. And then I see this and I was like, wow. Just, completely amazed by that. So I saw the work for the first time in 2014. Super inspired, but I was like, yeah. I just could not even fathom that work. But I saw it again in 2019 during Basel Week in Miami at the Art Museum. And I just walked into the space and just my heart dropped all over again. It's almost like I experienced the work for the first time. And yeah, so I just kind of made it a personal challenge to do something of my own on that same scale. It took years for me to work up the audacity to say that I wanted to do something like that. The first time that I saw it, Ariston, we were dating at the time, and he was like, "Oh, you should do that. You should do something like that." And I was like, "Yeah, nah." But eventually worked up. Just with the themes that I was doing in my work and the skill level that I kind of, amassed, I built up the confidence to be able to attempt something on that scale.
And here you are standing in front of it, so you can get a sense of the scale. This is LaToya standing in front of the first of 5 scenes. And I love this image because you get a sense of the scale. Also, when we're looking at it, you are continuing your citational practices by including references to other artists from whom you've drawn inspiration, including Carrie James Marshall, as you just discussed. When I was curating the exhibition for the Frist, I was really interested in making sure that those inspirations were sort of brought into the same room and put in sort of direct conversation with your work. So when you see the installation here in the Cap Galleries, we were able to borrow Elizabeth Catlett's Roots, which we see here hanging above the bed from the Amistad at Tulane University, and that hangs in the entry gallery before you enter into the room with Carving Out Time. And you're really faithful to reproducing the print on the matrix as it appears in printed form. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the spaces that we see in Carving Out Time. I can play the little video that can run so you can see it in the background if that works while you talk about it.
Sure. Yeah, so the work, the way it's organized, I think about it as like acts of a play. So when you go to a play, there's act 1, act 2, act 3. And so when I got the idea for the work and the scale, it was just how do I organize these parts of my day? So I literally just made a list of everything that happens in the day. It was like 20 things. I was like, well, we can't do everything. So I thought about really making it into like segments or parts of the day. And so I had to narrow down a particular image or a particular scene that I thought would be best fitting for that particular part of the day. And so you see just the daily life of myself, my husband, and my 2 children. But I also really was thinking about the spaces. As I mentioned, I'm really into this idea of doing narrative portraiture. So I wanted to think about not only the figures in the spaces, but the spaces as characters in themselves. So you see the first scene is in my our bedroom, and then we go into our office where we normally do homeschool with the boys, and we have a dinner scene, and then we go into the boys' bedroom, bedtime for the boys. And then we end the day with me finally like being able to take off my mom hat and step into my role as an artist.
Encountered or saw images of carving out time as we were coming out of the pandemic, and I think for so many of us, you know, had been confined to our homes, balancing it all, figuring out how to make time for everything that we had to do, and you know, it just resonated on such a strong level with me personally, right? As the mother of young kids who had been home, trying to figure out how to do it all. And I think that one of the really incredible strengths of your work is the way in which, as we alluded to earlier, it navigates this line between the specific and the universal. So you are so generous in inviting us into your home, literally. You walk into the space and we are right there. I was speaking with someone last night who said that they were sort of nervous that someone was going to walk in and say, oh, you're not supposed to be here, right? You're literally bringing us through your day. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how you see that balance between the universal and the specific playing out, because I think that it allows your work, everyone to take something away from your work.
Yeah, and so the specificity of it means that I am showing you particular things that relate to my life on a personal level, but I think the universal aspect of it comes out because we all deal with those same things, and I feel like a lot of times we have assumptions about people who are outside of our like race or outside of our like cultural group or however you want to categorize these different things, but in most instances we're a lot more alike than we are separate. And I feel like sometimes though they may take on like a different type of aesthetic, they're still the same. Like we all have the same desires. We want our families to be safe. We want to have like wonderful places to live. We want to be able to provide good education. Now the ways we go about doing those things may be different, but at the core, all of our values and desires and aspirations that we have for ourselves and our loved ones are the same. So I think this work does a really good job of that, again, showing you from the lens of this Black family in a space that is historically has not been for us. So I think that's really powerful. And I remember this one instance in particular when the work was on view at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Somebody came up to me and they were like, this is the first time I've ever seen a representation of a Black family in a museum. And they were just, really honored that they got to be able to experience that. So I'm really excited that I'm able to, provide that experience for people, but through the lens of my family. And, we all have our spaces. We all have like our favorite chair, or our favorite slipper, the coffee mug that we prefer to drink out of as opposed to all of the other ones. And so when I was curating the spaces, I really wanted to feel like a lived-in type of space. And to feel authentic and to feel natural to what was happening. I mean, there obviously had to be some staging that had to take place just because as an artist, I'm thinking about composition, thinking about form and value and texture and all the elements of art and principles of design, but I still wanted to make it seem really authentic to our everyday life. And so people can kind of see themselves. And you mentioned talking about the pandemic. In addition to being an educator at Maryland Institute College of Art, my husband and I also homeschool. And so, when everybody was going crazy about their kids being home, we were like, well, this is our normal life, so we're kind of good. But I in particular wanted to, can we go to the second scene? Yeah. So I knew for sure that I wanted to have this scene included because at the time there was just the experience of a lot of parents at that time. It's something that's normal and natural to us, but a lot of other people were kind of just being abruptly thrust into now having to teach their kids at home and just trying to figure out how to do that. And so I particularly put a lot of things in this space. So you can see me, I'm at the table with my son, my oldest son, Ade. We were doing homeschool lesson, and then there's a basket of laundry, so I'm trying to like fold clothes and do his lesson with him at the same time. And then my other son has like blocks and things that he's playing with in the floor. So really just trying to capture that idea of like just the busyness of the day and this idea of trying to multitask and how sometimes that's not as successful as we'd like to think it is or could be. So just really thinking about these really tender and everyday moments that I think sometimes we can take for granted.
And I think your rendering of these everyday moments on such a grand scale really marks a very important intervention into the canon of art history. Because like you said, there's, while there might be scenes of Black labor that abound, we don't have a lot of scenes of Black family life, particularly joyous Black family life. And so to do that on such a grand scale, which, I liken to sort of this grand tradition of Western history painting, which were these, long narratives typically devoted to telling the escapades of sort of heroic white men, right? Here, you're really offering us an opportunity to think really critically and closely about what's absent by giving us something that's present. I wanted to talk a little bit, you were using sort of the word curate to talk about how you were curating the images that you included in the scenes that make up Carving Out Time. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your process and sort of the steps that went into the work.
Yeah, so I guess talking about it from an organizational standpoint, just thinking about like the project management aspect of it, because I had never done anything on this scale before, so I had to really take a lot of time to really think and plan things out. So I did, different phases. I mentioned first I just started writing down everything that you do in a day, and then just kind of sketching out like how many panels do I need to have, how many panels per scene. Carrie James Marshall's was 12, so I was like, well, I got to do more than that. So ended up with 15, but also coordinating that with the space that is going to be showing in. And so that kind of informed how the organization of the panels would take place, considering the space. I wanted the flexibility for them to be all shown in a line, kind of like a film strip, but also to accommodate various types of spaces, so that's why I ended up putting the scenes separate so they can, exist as their own type of entity. And so I just started with like loose stick figure sketches, thinking about what rooms were going to be involved, who was going to be at what room at what time of day, what made the most sense, and how things would kind of flow into each other. And then from there, the stick figure sketches, I did, some like more rough sketches, and then I sat with my husband. I'm really blessed that he's a photographer, and so I was like, okay, well, I want this scene to look like this, and we kind of walked through what I needed for each of the scenes, and then we just picked a day and we did photo shoots. Like was a whole day of photo shoots, and I told the boys to put on your favorite pajamas because that's what's gonna be in the artwork. And so he literally just like would set up the camera in a corner of a room, like have the portable, like the shutter, and then every now and then we would give direction and say, okay, you stand over here, you turn this way, the light's coming from here, so you need to look that way. And then from the photographs, I was able to make more detailed sketches to scale. So each of the full-size panels are 8 feet tall, 12 feet wide, so I just did a smaller scale and maybe taking reference from like maybe 6 or 7 photos to create each of the scenes, and then, just kind of refining from there. Then in terms of like actually getting to the panels, I kind of developed the process of starting from a black surface. Normally with most printmakers, you have the wood and then you maybe draw with a Sharpie, and some people kind of stain the wood red. But for me, it just made the most sense to just start with a black surface, because a lot of my print work is black and white anyway, or from a traditional standpoint. It allows me to see like the contrast earlier in the process. In the past, because I work so detailed, I would carve away too much sometimes, and so having the black surface and carving away just allows me to get an idea of what it's going to look like earlier in the process, as opposed to having to proof it and ink it and then look at it and say, oh, I need to go back and fix all these things. So the image on here, you can see kind of a little bit of all the stages, right? So you see the black surface is just black paint that's been painted onto these cherry wood panels. I draw with a white pencil. So you can see evidence of that. It's a water-soluble pencil, so if I make mistakes, I can just get a wet rag and wipe it away. And then you can also see like the beginning stages of the carving process. And so that's kind of how, the process for like the entire piece.
So we're fortunate enough to have the panels here on view, but you decided at some point to pull prints off of the panel. So could you talk to us a little bit about that decision and when that happened in the process?
That wasn't really my decision, to be
Okay.
honest. To be honest. So my intent was for just the matrices to be the artwork. And
Okay.
so I was gonna have color and collage and do all these things. But I had to submit to the wisdom of my loving husband.
Okay.
He was saying that this is such an important piece and it's so monumental and it's going to be so important, like for your career, that you really need to take the time to print from these blocks. And so because of that, I had to change the way that I approached it. Because normally with my smaller works, if there's a place where I know I'm going to collage or put something over it, I don't take the time to carve that. And so when I made the decision to print the pieces, I said, oh, well, I have to carve everything so that the print will look right. And then I can go back and do all the other stuff. But in the process of doing the carving, I just felt it was so beautiful and powerful that it didn't need anything else to be added to it. And so I had to carve all of the panels, and then we had to prepare for the people who came to print them to come and print them with us. And then I had to let the ink dry a little bit so I can go back and retouch the blocks for any lines that kind of had filled in. So there's an edition of 2 of the set of prints. So you can see here at the bottom of the screen like what the works on paper look like. And so they're just, again, black and white. And then you can see there's an image of what the 5th scene looks like as in its print version. So I have an edition of 2, and then I have a set that's for me and my family to keep. And then I also have like an extra scene 5 that I just kind of use as like a self-portrait.
And unfortunately, for anyone interested in acquiring them, both sets have been acquired, right? Harvard
Yes.
Art Museum snatched one, and then I learned recently from LaToya's newsletter, which she'll provide info later for you to sign up for, that the Milwaukee Museum of Art has just acquired the second. Harvard Art Museum will actually have on view their suite of prints starting in March. But I love this image of you in your studio, scene 5, because as I write in the gallery guide, it gives an indication of what's coming next. There's a long tradition of artists depicting themselves at work in their studio. Here I've heard you describe elsewhere that you were really interested in highlighting your role as a painter. We see you sitting facing us with a palette in hand, surrounded by work that's in progress, some that's finished, some that isn't. You might, if you have keen eyes, notice Aaron and Anaya with hydrangeas hanging on the wall of the studio, and then Arc of Safety laid down on the floor with some gouges continuing to be worked on. So I'd love to talk about what happened after carving out time and where your work has evolved as we see on view here. And then I'm cognizant of the time, so I want to keep some time for questions at the end.
Okay.
But
after carving out time, I had to rest because it was a lot. But no, I was really, I really love that scale of the 8x12, and so I've always been a fan of working large, so that's a scale that I'm going to continue to bring in my practice. And so from there, I just engaged in a few other projects for other exhibitions that I had coming up. This is an example of one. This is titled Flourish. This is 8x8 square, but still on that same large scale, and again, continuing that process that I established with carving out time. Now this one I did not print. But carving out time was just like something special, so we had to get that printed. But again, I'm really interested in just presenting the carving as the work itself, and so this work is exemplary of that. Just still continuing with that large scale, pushing this idea of blending my identity as a painter and printmaker.
And you can still see your interest in texture and pattern here, I think, as the work evolves. And then some more recent work, and we can talk more about this in the Q&A if people have questions. But this is A Moment of Care, which is a woodblock print that's also on view in the exhibition. And I think it's important to point out that when we were pulling together the show, and I'm just going to move ahead here.
Yeah, the final image is at the end. Yeah.
There we go. Here we go. This is A Moment of Care. That, carving out time is about sort of labor in a lot of ways, a labor of love, we would say, both artistic and familial. And when we were talking about the show and her more recent work, this theme about self-care came up, and you phrased it yesterday so beautifully about how you see the galleries working together, and what Carving Out Time was saying, and how in some ways the other works in the gallery speak to what was missing from Carving Out Time. Could you speak just briefly about that?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, Carving Out Time is a portrait of my day, and you see me kind of always active or doing something. And so when we were thinking about works to include in this show, for me, a natural question was, since Carving Out Time was like the anchor piece for the work, what was missing from that work? Or what was like, if I could do other scenes to fit in that work, what would it be? And so I, quite naturally wanted to include images of me being able to rest at some point, which is, something that I'm thinking about. Just, you asked like what happened after Carving Out Time, like a lot has happened. A lot has happened. I'm really thankful that, my work has become more sought after, and I've been able to thrive a little bit more, but just really thinking about how to balance like the success, but also thinking about it from a point of sustainability, like how I'm able to like physically take care of myself through the process. So a lot of these works that are in the second gallery, the other gallery space, are reflective of that, this idea of like learning how to rest as hard as I work, basically. And I think that's another universal thing that a lot of women can relate to, particularly I think like women of color, this idea, challenges this idea of like, the superwoman, like the superwoman complex, like feeling like you always have to go, do, and you're never able to express that you're tired or that you're frustrated or you're seen like ungrateful if you express anything other than like the strength and the person that keeps everything going and like holds everybody together. So I wanted to kind of show images that show the flip side of that. And one of my friends, I was presenting at a conference, and I was just talking about this idea of salt of the earth and us being the preservers of our family and culture and community, and the salt being cast out. And she was like, well, how do you show that in your work? Because at the time I hadn't. And so I have been thinking about how to do that, and these images kind of represent that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that, the prompt that we have for visitors to respond to in the gallery is, how do you carve out time for yourself? And I think that sort of is the ethos of a lot of the work in that gallery. We could sit up here and talk for hours, and I want to make sure I leave some time for people to ask questions, since we're so lucky to have LaToya with us. You're looking at her most recent self-portrait, but I wanted to leave up on screen the title work, Pinnacle, from 2023, of her family, that maybe if we have some time, we can talk about too. But I think Megan has a mic if people have questions, and we can.
That was fabulous. Rebecca, you are a star interviewer in person. LaToya, I'm blown away by your art, and I actually saw your show at the Virginia Contemporary Museum, so I'm so happy that it's here. Rebecca made a comment about Carving Out Time being history painting, and I was thinking about a couple of things I just want to share with you, and then I have a question. That you are, as a woman and as a Black person, as Rebecca suggested, working in this traditional manner of history painting. But I was really struck by you bringing in all of these history painting, portrait, genre scenes with printmaking, painting, and that your process of creating art fits into the academic tradition, and that your works are really sort of inserting yourself as a woman and a Black person in that academic tradition. So I was very struck by your female nude, and I've only seen this one, and I wanted to ask you a question, because I've just been talking about how your works remind me of these traditions, but you're a Black female nude. I can't think of a female nude in the history of art, just in running through my mind, that is like yours. Can we go back to that? Because she seems to be very assertive in ways that female nudes are not, and that you're not following any traditional representation of the female nude in terms of pose. And I was really struck by that, and I wanted to ask you, because I think in this work you're you're in that tradition of the female nude, but I think you're challenging it in many ways, and I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, that's correct. As I mentioned before, this was from my thesis work from graduate school, and I, again, was studying the intersection of like race, beauty, and identity, and I was doing that through 3 particular avenues. Through hair, like hair culture is something that's really important. In my community, I was also thinking about colorism, which is something, you know, that I had become really interested in based on like a lot of the teenagers that I worked with at the time, just seeing like evidence of like colorism happen even in their conversations. And the last thing that I was really looking at was the body, right? Because the body is the site that houses everything, our physical appearance, our sense of self. And so I really wanted to do these nude portraits, one, just as a figurative artist, that's just kind of a traditional part of your academic training. Even as a teacher, I teach life drawing, so the whole course focuses on the nude. But really, I was thinking about it just in terms of like the historical representations of Black women, how there's not a sense of ownership or autonomy. There's always this kind of like exoticism or like fetishization of us. And as a woman who was making images of other women, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't falling into that same category. So I often see my work with the models that we're collaborators working on the work together. And so for me, that was really important with these particular ones, since they were nude, which it was really hard to find people who wanted to pose nude. Just making sure that they were a part of the process, right? Because we experience art in a triangle. So we have the artist, we have the subject in the work, and then we have the viewer. But a lot of times you either hear the artist talking about the work, you hear the viewer commenting or responding on the work, but a lot of times you never hear the voice of the subject of the work. And so that was something that I wanted to make sure that I was highlighting in these particular pieces. And so a lot of times I'll just kind of explain what I'm looking for, what the general like ideas of my work are, but I also say I want you to feel comfortable, like what makes you feel like powerful. And so we just kind of start there, and a lot of these were done from photo shoots. I took images of them and then kind of picked the ones that I wanted to work from. But yeah, I see them very much as a part of the process. It's not just me dominating the work, but seeing them very much, wanting them to have a voice in the process as well. Thank you for your question.
Strong work, thank you. I have a series of questions concerning the process. What city were the pieces, the large pieces mentioned near the end, what city were they printed in? Who printed them? What press was used? And what paper was used, please?
You're an artist? Those are all artist questions. So the Carving Out Time, that work was produced at a studio I was renting at the time in Maryland. I'm from Baltimore, originally from Arkansas, but I live and work in Baltimore right now. And so, yeah, the studio space, I had to work on one scene at a time because there was only like one 15-foot wall that was enough to fit one scene at a time. So it happened there in my studio space. And I didn't use like a print house to print my work. So normally with my smaller work, I do all my printing myself. And so I'm a trained printmaker. But for this project, we used a group called Big Ink. And so they have a mobile printing press. So they were able to take their press apart, put it in their van, and they came and set up in an empty studio that was right beside the studio where I was working. So they printed it there. They do workshops like all around the country. If you're interested, it's bigink.org. And so they invite people to do large-scale relief blocks, and they just kind of set up at different art centers, and they just like print for 2 days. And so I hired them to do a private printing session for me, which came with like 48 pieces of paper. That's why there's only additional 3 with 3 sheets of paper left over to do the extra print. And so the paper was tricky. I am a fan of cotton paper. But with woodblock printing, it's best to use some type of like Japanese paper. We couldn't find a paper that was large enough, a Japanese type of paper that was large enough to fit the blocks, because that would have been the easiest way to print. So Lyle, he did just a little bit of research, and he found this paper. We had to take it because it was the only cotton paper that was large enough to fit the project, that had actually enough rolls that I could buy all at one time to complete the project. And it's an academic roll, Fabriano paper, I believe.
in the gallery of behind-the-scenes video that you can see with LaToya working with baking to pull the print, so you can see that process there. Should we move over to that side?
Hi. This might be a question where you can say, "Oh, it's just you," and but I thought I'd try to ask this. When we were walking through the show, we kept looking at shoes and feet over and over again. And then you put up your family photo in the beginning. I'm like, wow, I started looking at everyone's shoes and feet. Do I have a problem? Or is that, I don't know, they almost become supporting characters. You see your slippers again and again. Sneakers, I noticed them coming out under the bed. You can say, if you're like, Anna, that you're just too obsessed with feet. But like, I don't know, like the idea of a supporting character and the shoe and the foot, I had to ask.
I think it's more an idea of it being like real, like in your house, like your shoes are around. Like in the bedroom, it almost looked, in the first scene of Carving Out Time, is us in the bedroom, it almost looked like too clean in a way. So I was like, there's nobody's shoes around. So like me sticking those shoes from under the bed, that was kind of like a last minute thing, because I felt like I just needed another element on that side of the composition. But my husband is like I wouldn't call him a sneakerhead, but he's very particular about our feet wear, particularly our tennis shoes. And, you know, he has New Balances, and so I just put the New Balances there under the bed, but I didn't realize that New Balances was like a popular shoe in Baltimore. I found that out later during like the show of Carving Out Time at the BMA. People were like talking about the New Balances. So in that regard, they are like significant. But in this particular work, in Pinnacle, and just a little bit of backstory behind this work, over the summer, I had an exhibition at the newly named Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts. And so while I was there, the boys were there spending time with the family, and I was meeting them there from a residency. And so we enjoy like walks in nature as a family, and we decided to climb Pinnacle Mountain at Pinnacle Mountain State Park. It was the boys' first time doing it, and they made it to the top of the mountain like champs. And so we just, you know, quite naturally wanted to celebrate and document that time. And my husband, as I mentioned, he's a photographer, so he's always trying to document things. So I behind the camera taking a photo of them. And so he was doing the practice of grounding. So like you take your feet off to like connect and energize yourself through the earth. And so we were just capturing that moment, but I felt it was important to the work. And so his shoes are like in the background, just to show that he did have shoes on his feet and the climbing of the mountain, yeah.
I think we have time. Well, Megan, you'll cut us off, right? You can, as timekeeper.
Well, Robbie, what was the first artwork that you had did?
The very first artwork, I don't know. Yeah, so I would say maybe as a professional artist, I would say one of the first, and for me, describing professional means like I'm done with school and now I have to like pay my own bills and stuff. Professional artist. I did a series of mixed media monotypes. I do monotype as well in addition to relief carving. I did a series of monotypes that I showed at the Arkansas Historic Museum. And that was in 2013, yeah, right out of graduate school.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we can do one more. You've got one too? All right.
So, Mommy, so on the Pinnacle one, you had carved it, right?
Yes.
How many lawns did you make?
All these impossible questions. I don't know, baby. Maybe when it comes back, I will put you in charge of counting, and then we'll find the answer.
I want to say thank you to LaToya for generously sharing these other insights into the work that's on view, your process, for sharing your family life with us all, and to remind you all that Carving a New Tradition is on view through April 28th. Come back. I promise you, you will want to visit more than once. And if you can get into the space when no one else is there, your mind will be blown. And thank you to the Frist, again, for hosting us and the exhibition, and for all of you for coming. LaToya generously put up a slide with her Instagram handle, her website, if you want to follow along. I feel incredibly fortunate that here in Nashville, we have your work even for a brief time. I know you're going to see it in many, many places for years to come. So thank you.